Today we're going to be doing some Bonsai 101, and we're going to be showing off my collection that I've been working on just under 20 years. So as you can see above, we have some Florida native grapes. We have two different grapevines growing over the pergola. We have the muscadine and the scuppernong. I don't want to be stepping on grapes the whole time, so I'm going to move some chairs out of the way, get out my broom. So I'm just going to start sweeping here. So these grapes and these leaves actually are a great ingredient for my compost bin. So this is a traditional compost pile. I don't know if any of you guys used to watch Fraggle Rock. Remember the compost heap in that show? Pretty classic. He actually was a character on Fraggle Rock, but I think they were trying to teach kids the importance of composting subliminally at the very least. But so this is my compost pile, and you know, we'll turn it every once in a while, and then it will turn into black gold eventually. So this is Bonsai 101 without any further ado. So I meet a lot of people at the garden center at Earthworks, and I have a lot of people who are interested in bonsai. And there are a lot of misconceptions about bonsai, mainly because I think most people's idea of bonsai comes from the Karate Kid, or that kind of idea of what a tree in a pot should look like. So bonsai, literally translated, is tree in a pot from the Japanese. And so technically any tree that's in a pot is a bonsai. Now, with that said, there's a lot of art, there's a lot of horticulture, styling, training, patience, care that goes into growing these plants in containers. So growing plants in containers present some very distinct issues that you have to think about. It's not like growing a plant in the ground. So there are a lot of considerations that are different when you are growing plants in a pot. So the first thing people ask me a lot of times is, what kind of tools do I need to practice bonsai? And really, to get started, you don't need anything other than a good pot, some potting soil, and a tree. And that's where you start. Because the process is really in the journey of the relationship between the individual and the tree is where it's really all about. And a lot of times people come into the garden center, they just want the finished product, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having the finished product and caring for it and keeping it trimmed and tidy, but for some of us, we really enjoy the process of bonsai. And many times, the beginning of the process starts with a cutting. So this is a cutting from a jade plant. I also have, actually most of my collection are not jade, although they look like jade. They have small leaves compared to the true jade plant, but the mini jade that I'm training in that you're going to see is actually Portulacaria afra, which is not a jade, although they look a lot like a jade. But this is a jade here in my hand, so with all that said, I do actually have a jade. And I took this cutting, I prepared it, and it has healed itself over a few days and is ready to be put in some potting soil. But this is where bonsai usually begins, with a cutting, or a seed, or with a collected plant. So those are the main ways that bonsai starts. People traditionally would go out into nature and they would collect a small tree or even a large tree, and then they would begin training it. And there are lots of ways to begin that, which we're not going to get into today. The other way that I mentioned is seed. So by planting a seed, you get to follow the life of the plant from its very beginning, from germination and hopefully to a finished bonsai. Cuttings are nice because for plants that root well from cuttings, you can get a head start. And so for slow growing plants, I like to take cuttings because I already have something that kind of resembles a tree somewhat. You know, I have a trunk, I have some branches, I have some leaves or some petals here, and I have cut off many of the petals because once you make a cutting, the main way that moisture can evaporate from the stem and the branches is through the leaves itself. Now, with jade, they are not very good at releasing moisture out of their leaves, which is perfect because they have actually evolved to trap moisture inside themselves. So succulents like a jade plant are perfect for beginners because they're very forgiving. They allow for a lot of mistakes, so to speak, and they will come back from near death So it's a really good plant to start with. So what I do is I take a cutting like this, very simply, and I will fill a pot about this size, sometimes a little bit smaller, and I will fill the soil up to about the ring. So I'm going to grab some soil here from the garden center, but I like the Fox Farm because they are very conscious of their mixtures, and they make a very consistent blend that I have no problem controlling the moisture. All right, so when I fill these up, you'll notice that each of these pots has a lip. I generally fill it up to the lip, and then I compress it a little bit. Now here's a little thing I do, and I take the pot, I take a second pot, and I just very lightly compress it. And I don't do this all the time when planting things, but I do this with cuttings. And the reason why I do this with cuttings is, one, I'm pushing a little bit of air out. Now don't misunderstand me, I'm not pushing down really hard. I'm just barely pressing it down, just to level the soil, push out a little bit of air, but by leveling it and compressing it just slightly, I can now take this cutting and place it in here, and the soil is going to be a little more compressed, which is going to hold this cutting in place a little better. Chopsticks. Okay, so when you go out to eat or you order in Chinese food, keep chopsticks. They come in handy for gardening, especially bonsai. So I take the fat end and I just kind of make a little hole here, and then I'll stick the cut end of the stem in there, and I'll just gently kind of compress it a little more so that the plant cutting stands up on its own without any help. Now there are times I take larger cuttings, and I'll show you some plants that I've actually added some supports to. You see I put some rocks in there, so you can see how top heavy this cutting would be. This is a pretty large cutting, but what's nice about these Portulacaria is that you can take large cuttings and they'll still root. And I don't know if you can see the detail on this, but you can see that some of the leaves are puckered up and wrinkled. Okay, that's part of the plant having to give up something in order to put energy into making roots. It can't support everything, so it will sacrifice some of the leaves during the rooting phase while this plant is trying to establish its root system. But you can see these rocks in here, and these are keeping this cutting in place. And the reason why I want it to stay in place and not to move is the more it moves, the more likely that those new tender roots that are coming off of that stem are going to break. So I want to keep this plant as still and as secure as possible. Now you also notice I have numbers on here. This is a date. This is June of 2018. So I took this cutting this June, and all my plants have little plant markers in them as to when I started them from cutting. So you'll see, for example, this one was back in 10, so about 8 years ago. And while we're over here, this is my mother plant. This is the mother from which my whole collection has come from. So she is the oldest. I got her in approximately 06, and I have been training and styling her ever since. You'll see I have some supports. I have some chopsticks in here, and the chopsticks are actually holding the branch in a certain position. So after several months, when I take that chopstick away, that branch will stay in that position. I'm also pulling this branch down to create some separation between the other branches above it. And this is a piece of Velcro. Actually, it's like Velcro tape. It's perfect, it's soft, supple. It gives a little bit so it doesn't bite into the soft bark of the tree. And we'll hold it in this position until I feel like the branch is gonna hold itself after I take it off. So this is the mother, and a quick scan will show you, these are all of her babies. So this is her nursery. So over the years, as these mature and I train them and I put them in a finished bonsai pot, then I will sell them at the garden center at Earthworks. This is one of her newest offspring, a cutting. This is from this month, and you'll see I just have a tiny branch that I cut off of her and is getting started. So in several years, it'll look like a tree. It may even look like something like this. This was a mature branch, and that's what's kind of cool about training the Portulacaria, is that the branches themselves look like miniature trees. So I will grow out the mother plant to the point to where I have enough growth to where I can take cuttings off of her and have little mini bonsai right out of the gate. which is kind of cool. So this is already starting to look like a tree, and within a few years it may be somewhere more like at this stage with a bigger trunk, something like this. So this has had a lot of pruning. We're not going to talk about pruning techniques today, but just an introduction. So in a couple years you could have something like this, looking something like this. All right, now you do have to take care of the plant, make sure it gets food, water, sunlight. But what's nice about this pergola here is that I get some pretty bright direct and indirect light, but mostly indirect light throughout the day, which is really nice for these plants. They don't have to take full sun. Full sun all day is okay, but I like the filtered light. It's a little gentler, and my plants seem to thrive with very bright indirect light for the Portulacaria. Now each species is different of plant that you're going to be growing, and over time you'll get to know what your plants prefer, and you will find the right position. So when it comes to gardening in general and bonsai, success is usually determined by your interest, how interested you are, and your interaction with the plants. You really have to interact with them. You can't just have a plant, set it in a pot, and just leave it there and never pay attention to it. It's all about interacting with it. So this is my stock. This is from which I cut everything from, and she treats me well, and I take very good care of her. And she's been with me for at least 12 years, and she was several years old when I purchased her. But when I purchased her, she looked a little more wild. So let me show you what a Portulacaria looks like when they are not trained. So this is an example of what the plant looks like in its natural form, which is, it's a beautiful plant. But you can see the distance between the branches, right? You can see how spaced out these branches are, how long and leggy it is, which is beautiful. And so the art of bonsai is taking something and training it into a different form that simulates a tree in nature. Now, what I'm doing with this Portulacaria is maybe not the most traditional bonsai, because in nature it does not look anything like one of these here. So this would be not a natural form. But the fun of this, after you pull the grapes out, is what you have after many years of attention, training, pruning, feeding. You get some pretty interesting specimens, and each one is an individual, which is also fun, because when you start, you can have a idea and you can have a thought or a sketch. Many people will sketch what they want their trees to look like, and they'll train them to kind of follow that form. But each one kind of takes on its own personality, and so I try to allow the plants to express themselves to a certain degree, and then I put my influence and my perspective into shaping them as well. But by and large, I try and let each individual take on its own personality. In closing, I just want to give everybody a little bit of encouragement who's interested in bonsai. You don't have to have a lot of fancy tools, although I would encourage a tweezer. They're cheap. Tweezers are great for pulling weeds out of those small pots. Tweezers, very nice, stainless steel. And but you don't have to spend a lot of money to get started. I mean, terracotta pots are the best, and I will talk about terracotta pots a little bit, in that they are the best, I think, because they breathe and they allow moisture control more so than ceramic or plastic. So terracotta, inexpensive and some of the best to train all your bonsai in. But other than an inexpensive terracotta pot, some potting soil, and a plant to start with, that's really your startup right there, which is rather inexpensive for any hobby. And if you don't live here in Jacksonville, I bet you have somebody at a garden center, a locally owned garden center near you. That you might have someone who works there who has some interest in bonsai, or at least has some plants there that they can give you some guidance with. But come and visit us at Earthworks. You can come see me if you're interested in pursuing bonsai, and I would love to talk with you more about it. So check in with us on not only this YouTube channel, but check in with us on Instagram and on our Facebook page. We have a lot of information, a lot of content there. I am going to be posting not only videos and clips of videos from what we're doing with this series, but also some photographs. I do a lot of photography at the garden center, so I have a Instagram that you can check out. It's at the Tree Titan, at the Tree Titan. Check me out there. I have lots of photographs from the garden center, not only of bonsai, but a lot of the things that are flowering in season. I do videos and photographs of our koi ponds. Check those out. And we'll be posting some of those to the Facebook as well. Until next time, y'all take care, and I'll see you later.